Hello and welcome to Athlone Castle. My name is Jack Pinson. I'm a longbow maker, or bowyer, and Living Longbows is the name that I operate under. The sponsors for this event, the Heritage Council and the Wall Towns network as well. I've just realised my axe is rather blunt, so I'm giving it a little bit of a hone before we start. I suppose the first question is, what is a longbow? Or what is a bow, even? It's really a spring, a way to store potential energy so that you can send an arrow a long distance. I make a bow is out of a single piece of timber, and sometimes out of laminate bows for more modern stuff. Historically, you can use any material. Well, you can use a lot of different materials for making bows, and the materials were dictated by the culture and the surroundings from where the historical bows originated from. So you can use bone or horn, sinew, mulberry wood, bamboo, but we don't have those in Western Europe mostly. We have yew though, and so that's what was used a lot in Western European cultures through history to make longbows. The reason they're called longbows is because they have to be long to withstand the amount of pressure on the piece of timber for the bow to be effective. I've got in my hand here a piece of yew. Now it is just a small branch of yew, but it's got some straight sections through it without too many knots. As a bowyer, I'd usually be looking for clean, straight, clear yew, which means yew wood which doesn't have any bends or checks or too many knots in. Now a certain amount of knots is permissible depending on the power of bow you're going to be making. A lot of my inspiration for making bows comes from my master, Don Adams, of the traditional craft guild of Bowyers and Fletchers. He trained me in making these bows, and then he also then started asking me the question through my training, who used these bows? He asked me, well, who do you think could pull back a 140-pound war bow made of yew wood? And I compare that to myself. I can pull, well, now I can pull probably 80 pounds draw weight if I try, and not all day either. So doubling that is something like what the medieval archers were shooting, the Tudor archers in particular, as we know from the Merry Rose. This stave here, or well, this branch, is not a warbow grade material. This is just an experimental, a practice piece, a demonstration piece, but it also shows you what I might start with. A small stick like that, or a larger log which I might split down. And then I would use a side axe to roughly shape it. Now this is an axe which has a flat face on one side, which is this whole side here, and a bevel on the other side. This is a right-handed side axe. It's made by a blacksmith, a toolmaker blacksmith, and it was made for my master Don, and I've inherited it since then, so thank you to Don for that. First of all, I'm going to select which side will be the back of the bow, which is the bit away from the archer, and I'm going to leave that alone. And then I'm going to turn it round, because I reckon this would be the back here. I'll avoid that knot and that knot, and it's fairly straight. So I'm going to turn it around and start removing material from the other side to achieve a taper. And there's a technique for doing that, which I'm demonstrating now, where I'll make a series of hatch marks up the side of where I'm cutting and then chip them all off. Like that. And that removes quite a lot of material quite quickly. Check I'm working in the right place. So I've worked off the thick end first. I'll do a bit more on that. This is on the inside of the bow, the bit towards your belly when you shoot it. So it's called the belly of the bow. And I have to achieve a taper. Okay, there you can see I'm using too much strength and not enough technique. So I'll just knock them off and make the hatch marks again up like that. Now I've got to check it's in line, so it's twisting a little bit on me. Now at the very tip it's only going to be approximately ½ an inch in cross section, so width and depth. So there's very little to take, well, there's very little left at the very bottom and at the very top. So I can take quite a lot off at the tips. and less at the handle. There'll be some coming off there, but not as much as at the tip. So I'll turn it round, and keeping it in line at the top, I get to take off these knots here now, which is going to be a little bit more challenging, but it's good to get rid of them. They'll only go into the centre, they won't go to the other side. So there's one. Yeah, you see it's a little bit harder to work. I can use the slicing of the axe a bit more. And has it twisted? Yeah, a little bit. Well, you get the idea. This is the rough shaping. And it can be done fairly quickly, but it does take quite a lot of effort. And when you hit a knot or a twist in the grain, it slows you down a little bit, but you've got to work around it. Part of the reason for using an axe like this and not just sawing it out on a bandsaw, well, historically they didn't have bandsaws, but also you get to read the grain more carefully when you do it like this. So I can see that there's a knot there, so I can work around it but leave more material if I need to. And that's part of making a self bow, which is a single piece of wood, is reading the grain and using the twists and curves in the grain to achieve a full and even curve through the whole bow, in the case of a historically designed full compass bow like this will be. Well, hopefully will be. You've got to remember that any bow you ever make could break when you're making it, or when you finish making it. So nothing's guaranteed, especially when you're using just a single piece of timber like this. You get the idea for the axe work. I've got more work to do on that, of course. Yewood always demands its tithe, because I've cut myself a little bit with the axe there, which is typical when going live, right? Set that in the block and put that over the top. So the next stage, once that's shaped down and tapered down to my satisfaction with the axe, I'll move over onto a different device here now, or use a different tool, which is the draw knife. And to use a draw knife, I need my two hands. A draw knife is like that. I need two hands free to use a draw knife safely, and with enough, safely and efficiently. So that means I need to use a form of clamping device to hold my workpiece in place, which in this case is a shaving horse. Now you can use vices and you can use clamping systems and all sorts of different things, but I like there are depictions of people using shaving horses like this device here through many eras of history, many different contexts going back. Especially, like for example, the Bowyer tapestry has images of people sitting on benches using something like this, and even going back to Roman times, I believe, as well. It's just a form of clamping device, and yeah, so you use your 2 feet to clamp the material in place. This one is a stave of ash wood. I have previously worked. It's much bigger than the U piece I was just starting off with there. It'll hopefully be a heavier, stronger bow. It's a bit too deep in the handle and around here in the knots at the moment. So the handle is where I have it marked. Centre line is there, 1 inch up is the top of the handle, and 3 inches down from the centre line is the bottom of the handle. If you can see that there. It's just a way to quickly identify which is the top and bottom limb. They are slightly offset, even in a bow like this. You'll find other historical designs of bows like the Japanese style bows, or very offset with a very short bottom limb usually and a very long top limb. It achieves a different form of tension in the bow. So with this now I can keep the workpiece clamped securely with my feet, using the strongest legs in my body, which are the legs of course, and then have my 2 hands free to use the draw knife, which I just started doing automatically. It might be a bit difficult to see from that angle, I'm not sure if you can, but what I'm doing is slicing the draw knife towards me. I use it with the bevel down in this case, and also so I draw it towards myself, but because I got 2 hands on the tool, I can't really easily cut myself. I explain this to people when I do courses. Your body doesn't really bend in the way that you could actually damage it. So another part of the technique, which I usually use with a draw knife, is drawing towards me for cutting, but also across the length of the blade as I do that as well. So there's a bit of technique to using a draw knife well. That basically means I can draw knife work for longer because it preserves it increases the amount of time you can work if you use good technique. So I'm just bringing down the belly of the bow on this case, so that's that side now. It's hard to orientate this now, but what's facing towards you now is the back of the bow, so that's what is facing towards the target if you're shooting it. And if I turn it round that way, you can see the side and then the belly of the bow, and that's sort of it will be a curved sort of full curve shape, whereas the back is flat as the tree grew it. So on the back of the bow is a single growth ring, so that's where I've removed the bark, and maybe in this case, no, just the bark, because it's ash and there's very little sapwood. There's only one fine layer of sapwood which you take off with the bark. So that's very easy to do on ash. On yew, it's a different story, where if you remove the sapwood and the heartwood combine in the bow, and to get the back of the bow down to one growth ring can be very challenging. Sometimes you need to take off several layers of sapwood and then get down to the one you've chosen and nominated to be the final back of the bow. That's another element of detail that we can look at on the final bows when I show you in a minute. In the meantime, this piece of ash, it has several knots in. If you can see, 3 main ones there actually, which I have to leave extra material around to strengthen. Now the knot will weaken a part of the bow. I've got one in the handle here. That part there will be slightly weaker if I were to slice it off totally flat. But if I leave extra material around the knot, it supports that and takes account of that extra weakness. Well, the weakness isn't there until you start. The weakness isn't there in the tree. It's when it's growing. It's only there when you cut it and split it and shave it down and come close to come too close to where the knot is. So you can see there's a bit of a bulge around that knot and around this one, and that's the way the tree grew. So I've left that there deliberately. So this bow will have some character or some shape to it, which is not just a sliced off, clean, straight cut piece of timber. So I suppose that's shaping that down, and then putting a string onto that is the next stage. So I have a little file, a little round file like this to cut a groove in the top. I'll just do a quick little show you what I mean by that. So I'm going into the side of the bow and just a little bit around on the back face. And you can do it on the other side as well. And all this is a tillering knock, a knock to start the process of bending the bow, which is called tillering. And it doesn't have to be fine or fancy or anything, it just has to hold the string in place while the bow is first bent. I have another one to show you, which is at that stage now with the string just freshly on it. So this is a piece, moving back to yew again, yew wood, which in Latin, the European, is Taxus baccata. This is quite a nice stave. I'll see if I can brace it now to see how you can see. So the string groove is on the tip of the bow. That's just a tillering knock that'll be removed in the final bow. Mostly removed anyway. And I've had to extend my tillering string for this, so that's what that bit at the top is. It's just that the string wasn't long enough. So bracing the bow like that, there's now tension on the string. If you can hear that. You shouldn't ever really draw a bow and release it without an arrow, but that's not really drawing it. The next thing is it gonna explode when I draw it back? Now it has been tillered back to 20 inches draw length already. And it's very heavy, all right. Yeah, it's still very strong, and it needs a bit of tillering still to come back to its full 32-inch draw. And I'm hoping I might get over somewhere, might get 120 or 130 pounds out of this stave. Maybe. We'll see how it comes out. You never know really until the very end, but well, towards the end anyway, how the bow will come out, or if something will happen where you have to change its design entirely, cut it shorter or do something drastic with it and reshape a lot of stuff. Anyway, this is a nice stave of yew which is fairly clean, and by which I mean without too many knots, twists or checks in the grain. you might notice that there are two colours in the bow as well. A pale colour, which is what I was talking about earlier, which is the sapwood of the bow, of the stave, and the red, darker colour, which is the heartwood. In yew wood, it seems that they have different bending properties, the sapwood and the heartwood. Elastic sapwood and compressive strength heartwood, and they combine naturally as they grow in the tree, obviously, and they just so happen to augment each other very well. So the sapwood protects the bow from shattering on in the tension side of the bow, and the heartwood stops the bow, gives the bow power. You can have the most amount of material resisting bend, which is what gives it power in the heartwood. And you can see that there quite nicely on this stave, with a thin layer, well, about 1/3 sapwood and 2/3 heartwood, something like that. Yep, so that's a yew stave which is in the process of being tillered. So what I might do to just show you what tillering looks like is I'll use my tillering stick. So it's like it's just a board with a series of grooves cut into it, and I have them marked to inches. And that's how you measure bows, with inches. So I can put that in the handle there, and then draw it back to the first one, and then draw it back to where I've come back to, which was 20 inches. There. And then I can check the bend and see how much it's bending and where it's bending. So what I'm looking for is a bit less twist than this, actually. I have to adjust that. Is even bend in the limb, and each limb matching the other limb as well. So it's quite stiff through the handle, and there's bend out here and there's bend here. That's just this stage of this bow right now, and I can look at it away from myself by putting it on a tiller stick like this. Now I don't leave it on the tiller stick for too long, because that will induce too much string follow, which is permanent bend in the bow. So I'll take it down off of that after I've checked. There we go. And in my mind now, I've just remembered that this bit's bending here. I'm going to leave that alone, and this bit a little bit less, but it is still bending a fair bit, which means that the central section needs to be reduced in material a little bit to increase the amount of bend through maybe this kind of area where between my hands here. But I wouldn't be using a draw knife. I might move at this stage on this bow onto a scraper. So this has a little burr on the edge, on each of the edges, and it has the ability to take off a very fine shaving. I'm not going to do too much work on this because it requires quite a lot of attention to get the tiller right at this stage. But I'll just show you what I mean by taking off basically micro shavings, very thin, controlled, but controlled shavings from specific areas, but also it works quickly enough with a burr on the edge of your scraper that it's worthwhile doing. So you wouldn't be doing it with a very fine sandpaper for a long period of time, for example. It wouldn't take enough off to make a difference. In interim stages, might be using something like a float like this. It's basically, we have a modern day surform or rasp would be what this would become nowadays, but this is an older version. This one's actually made out of a farrier's rasp, but you can the blacksmiths and toolsmiths would have been making these for bowyers in the 1500s, 15 cent and 1400s, yeah. And then another tool that I might use is a spoke shave like that as well. So that's very similar to a draw knife, but with a finer blade, and it's got a body that you hold on with the blade set into it, and that means that you can set the depth of the blade, which controls your shaving. So a few different tools, but quite a basic set really, nothing particularly extravagant. All right then, so that's somewhat close-ish replica of a Mary Rose longbow. The Mary Rose was a ship, Henry VIII's flagship of the Royal Navy, which sunk in 1545 in the Solent in the UK off of Portsmouth, and she was recovered after an extensive archaeological dig under the sea in Southampton water. Well, no, in the Solent, and there were a lot of over 130 intact longbows found in cases on board the vessel, and they're very well preserved. They were preserved in the silt anaerobically. What didn't last was the horn knocks, so they're all gone, but you can see the imprint of where they were on the bow, and they're very skillfully made. I can look at those bows in the museum and in Southampton, in Portsmouth Historic Dockyard, and see what they were working with. They were working with top grade Italian or Alpine yew wood, very close growth rings, very dense timber. Well, for yew wood anyway, it's still a softwood. And you can see where they worked around imperfections in the timber, just like we do today if you're when making a self bow. So that also leads us on to what they were used for and what they shot. And of course, what would a bow be without an arrow? And the answer is not very much at all. And I have here some examples of arrowheads and arrows close to what would have been used in the Middle Ages, or well, in particular during the 100 Years' War. So goose feather fletchings, linen bindings to hold the fletchings in place. I'll put them out on there and I'll pull them up a few at a time. The goose feather doesn't like travelling too well, so they used to cover it in copper verdigris paste to preserve it from mites and to keep the feathers intact as much as possible. So that's what would have been the final coat on there. Now if you look very closely, you might see a black stripe in the very end of the arrow, a groove that way, turning it round to see a black stripe there. That's a horn insert, and what that has the effect of is spreading the load as the string is released from the fingers, so that the pressure of the bow isn't just on the end of the piece of wood, it's also in across the horn. The horn has a very strong kind of cross fiber link bond, so it's very strong and it resists splitting. If you insert it into the timber, it has that same effect, and it stops the string splitting the arrow shaft as it's shot. These two shafts are made of ash. I have poplar ones mostly poplar and ash is what I have there. And then on the other end is that's the working end, I suppose. I have two examples there. That's a swept out swallowtail head, and then that's a practice head. But it is hand forged. It looks like it might be machined, but if you look closely, if we take a picture of it and put it up as well, you can see there is a forge line where the two layers have been bonded together when they've been hot forged by an arrowsmith. What other examples have I got here? Some pretty nasty arrowheads, all right. So that's a slightly barbed. So then you've got to ask the question of what are you shooting at? And in the case of the 100 Years' War era English archers, English, Gascon, Welsh archers is where they mostly came from. They were shooting at people first and foremost. They were shooting at different people, people in different forms of armour. So somebody with no armour on or lighter armour wouldn't fare very well against an arrowhead like that. Now that is a hunting head for deer hunting, but if it can drop a deer, it can also drop a person if they're not wearing any armour. So then people start wearing armour through different periods of history, and that's no longer effective, especially against something like mail like that. It's too wide, it's not pointed enough, and the mail is specifically designed to stop cutting edges. So when you start wearing mail, that's no longer effective, so you've got to change. So this is an example of the needle bodkin there. So the features of that is it's a very fine point with a long narrow taper, which has the effect of finding and exploiting one single link in the mail, and because of the long taper and the power behind it, will burst open that link if it needs to, or just penetrate through if it's bigger links as well, depending on, again, the size of the arrow. Now you'll notice they are socketed, and that's a forged socket, and that's what you asked the arrowsmith about, not the bowyer. How you make them, that's not me. So that's good, that's fine. But then the people who can afford it start wearing plate armour, and that's no longer effective against plate armour. It might be a bit if you get a gap, if you get lucky, but it's also liable to bend and break. So once you get past once a lot of your opponents are wearing plate armor, you have to shorten the length of the arrowhead to make it stronger. So there's less chance of it bending. So there's continual and continual tests about, do arrows from war bows penetrate armor? There's a nice new Tobias Capwell of the Wallace collection has collaborated with some others to do some investigation of that. You can look it up on YouTube. So that's Joe Gibbs, Todd of Todd's Workshop, and Will Sherman, an arrowsmith and an armourer whose name escapes me right now, but you can look it up on YouTube. It's a good test to look at, and the answers are inconclusive to a point. The concept being it gives an impact kill and doesn't destroy what you're shooting at, but also if you miss, because you're hunting small game, there's a higher likelihood of missing. It'll hit some undergrowth and then the arrowhead stops quickly, which flicks up the back end and you can find your arrow, whereas something pointed will just dig in and disappear. And you do find I've lost arrows in the most silly places, like in grass, like you see here. You can lose an arrow in that even. Well, yes, they are. There's a lot of time and effort in making them, and I've recently put up on my Instagram page one of the processes in selecting arrow shafts when they're from a box, when you haven't had to make the arrow shaft for their machine made ones. Just in the selection of shafts there's a lot of detail. Again, my main discipline with the Craft Guild of Bowyers and Fletchers, what I'm qualified in, is target longbows. I hope to also go achieve warbow mastership as well soon. There is a whole other category, or several other categories in the guild, one of which is the Fletcher, who would be responsible for assembling the arrow, but in particular shaping a true shaft, but also hundreds of true shafts, or thousands, over a lifetime. The quivers, I have a quiver there just to keep these in for transportation. In transportation, arrows were brought in sheaves of 24 arrows. Well, no, not in a bundle like these. These are unfletched, so they can be crushed together. I have a quiver for the fletched ones. Each archer was required to carry 24 arrows on his person by order of the king, and a stake and a mallet to drive the stake in, plus his bow, his sidearm. And then the additional arrows which are brought to the front line by your pages and your squires and support staff, basically, they would have been, I'm using Agincourt as an example, it's a well-known example. There was no wagons, there were only carts brought on the Agincourt baggage train, as far as we know, and they were stored in canvas bags, but bigger bags than just what you would carry on your 24 on your person, and they were stacked in a way that would preserve the fletchings from crushing. So not like the ones I have in my quiver, which are pretty tatty at this stage, I must admit. So what you would find is a leather spacer sewn into the inside of an arrow bag, and that has the effect of, when the arrowheads are bunched together in the bottom of the bag, spreading out the fletched end of the arrow shafts. I actually just sent away my last example of that to a customer, so I don't have one with me just now. Every part of the yew tree is toxic except for the aril, and it's an aril rather than a berry, which is like a berry, but it's not the seed is not entirely enclosed within the flesh. So you can eat that, but don't eat it. The shavings are the timber is seasoned when I work it. That's part of the process of making the bow, is seasoning your timber in the first place. So there's less sap. There's no sap in the wood when I'm working it, but there is residual toxins which are just in the timber. So just, I suppose, not eating after just working, but washing your hands before you go to do anything else, really. And I'll be doing that after this. Yes, it is toxic, and it is a thing to be aware of, but any wood, a lot of tropical wood dust is also toxic as well. People get reactions from hazel as well sometimes, I've heard of. I've been lucky so far, I haven't developed any particularly, as far as I know, ill effects from the dust particles or taxus poisoning. It's a toxin that builds up in your system over time, so it's something to stay mindful of, and it is carcinogenic, and it is irritant. Okay, native timbers first of all. So this one here is boxwood. it's a native timber, it's also hard, and it's the hardest and densest native timber, and you'll see it in formal gardens cut into shapes for hedging and topiary and that kind of thing. It's rare to find it in long pieces that are relatively straight, well, straight for a piece of boxwood anyway, yeah. And it's very strong and hard and dense and heavy, and therefore resists bending, and therefore it makes it a good mean wood bow. Mean wood being a term used for anything not yew or Osage or something else. There's an Osage orange bow, so that's an American bow wood, synonymous with the native nations people, or First Nations people. Is the Osage, and there's a wood named after that as well. Not in a European not used in a European context in the historical sense, but a very nice wood nonetheless for making bows. And then that brings me on to more modern stuff, laminate bows, which is what I make a lot of as well. Most recently with some deflex in the tips, so a little bit of opposite curve, so that will string up the other way. And then that stays in there, excuse me. So that curve stays in there, which has the effect of quickening the arrow flight effectively. That's made up of multiple layers of timber glued together instead of one piece, like a self bow. What happens once the archers have spent the arrows they've carried with them? Well, hopefully the baggage train hasn't been attacked, and the transportation lines are still open, and they're bringing up the reserve arrows off the carts or wagons or from the supply chain. If that's not the case, as happened at Agincourt, where it was attacked, the baggage train was in disarray and was not feeding arrows to the front line. Between the two main French advances, there was a lull in the battle, and there are reports from one of the chronicles I'm aware of that say that the archers went out into the effectively no man's land and picked up spent arrow shafts, recovered as many as they could, but then once those are gone, when the next advance comes and they've spent all of those arrows and they're all gone, and they're faced with a, let's say, foot armoured knight on foot is what they were looking at, attacking them with a pole axe, usually, maybe a sword, more likely initially a pole axe. They revert to their sidearm, which is behind a stake. They've got an array of stakes in front of them or around them, which for someone in armour with a visor down, well, especially when they're approaching, they have the visor down, very hard to see and hard to navigate on a muddy field. So then, yeah, the sidearm being a pole axe, so that's like a slightly taller than me axe, billhook kind of affair. So a blade on one side, a hammerhead type setup on the other side, and a spike on top. Sometimes, usually, different variants for different eras apply. But also they had what was a lot of the time what was known as a type of sword called a falchion, which is a single-edged cutting sword, like a glorified machete, but it usually had a handguard as well. So yeah, sword. Also, they had axes. Yeah, maybe not a sculpting axe like this, but more of a use axe, a day-to-day use axe, perhaps with a longer handle, perhaps with similar size to that. An archer's maul. This is a crude, rustic version, but it's entirely made out of holly wood, so I call it holly. Anyway, you can get iron, but you can have more elaborate versions with iron bands around to stop them splitting, to make them heavier at the end. In fact, lead weighted as well sometimes. So if you can imagine that being swung full force into the side of something breaking arms, it's blunt force trauma. So the archers to be an effective archer, a combatant in that setting, you'd be starting training from a very young age. Younger than 11 a lot of the times. What, is that yourself? You were around about 11? Yeah. So 10, 11, that's a good age. Just at least maybe even you'd already been started, but you'd be well on the way to shooting heavier bows, and then so over time developing musculature and bone development to take the heavy draw weight bows. So people in their 20s, much like soldiers today. And they were valuable soldiers. They were as indicated by the pay they were given for a commoner. So the commission of array was one way of raising forces for campaign, and then there was also retained soldiers, and they would be, you might have a depending on the duke or the lord or the king, it would have a retained contingent of archers, but also men-at-arms, and also, you know, different types of soldiers. And then there were, of course, the mounted archers, who were paid 3 times the amount of the non-mounted archers, will we say. But they didn't fight on horseback most of the time. There are accounts of it, like crossing fords, forming a bridgehead on the other side, shooting from horseback, but it's rare. More likely they were shooting from formation. And the concept of shooting from formation in the medieval warfare battlefield context is a mass shooting and blanket coverage of an area in projectiles. So it's not really so much picking off a target as in earlier warfare. It would be more mass shoot. So you're talking 4,000 archers launching arrows one arrow at least every 10 seconds for a number of minutes. And they're talking about hundreds of thousands of arrows raining down in certain areas at a certain time. So very intimidating to have to walk through, which the French did have to do at different battlefields. And so that's why they had to keep the visors down, and they had to and they ended up getting bunched up, shying away from where those arrows were coming from. And as they get closer, they get more accurate and more powerful. So it gets worse as you get towards the front line. So that's some elements of bow making and medieval archery. There's plenty more in my head. My name again is Jack Pinson. My business name is Living Longbows, and you can find me on Instagram as living.longbows, or email me at livinglongbows@gmail.com. And the website is livinglongbows.com as well. I make longbows for sale. I make arrows to go with them, though I'm not a Fletcher. And so customized or off the shelf, whichever works for you. And we can talk about the specifics. Matching the bow to the archer is my main goal. Thank you very much for watching. Send in your questions. I'll try to get to them later on. Bye.